And every time I came home, he was the first person to say hello. The first dog to say hello. When we first got Mchugh, I didn't know much about. I didn't know anything about training dogs. I didn't know about how dogs thought, what their instincts were, especially a retrieving dog, a hunting dog like a Labrador. So when Mchugh was a puppy, I took him in the backyard on his leash. I had a tennis ball, and I was going to play catch and fetch with Mchugh. So I thought. So I took him in the back, I took his leash off, and I threw the tennis ball, and off Mchugh went into the woods. He was gone, and he wasn't going after the tennis ball. So I had to scrap my plans of playing fetch and go fetch Mchugh out in the woods. A lot of times when he got away, he would just bolt out in the woods and he'd go hunting. Try to find a chipmunk or a squirrel or a deer. And so one time my dad went out looking for him in the snow. It was really cold. And eventually my dad said, I gotta turn around, because if I get stuck out here, they're not gonna find me until spring. And when he got back, there was the dog sitting on the front porch waiting to go in, like, here I am, let's eat now. I don't know the full story about the skunk. All I know is Mchugh got into a fight with a skunk and got sprayed, and I had to go to Giant to get the tomato juice. So here it is, about 10:30 at night. My dad comes down and says, Brian, you gotta go run to Giant and get as much tomato juice as you can. Mchugh got into a fight with a skunk. I'm like, wow. So I go to Giant, and they had a couple of these big cans of tomato juice, and I bought 9 or 10 of them. And I'm sure the cashier thought I was making Bloody Marys or something. She looked at me and she's like, that's a lot of tomato juice there. And all I could say was, I like tomato juice. So we take it home and we tried to bathe the dog. My mom did not want the dog in the house smelling like he did, but I think we actually used a plastic bath, one of those swimming pools that kids swim in. I'm not sure how we bathed him, but he smelled like skunk for a good month before we washed it out of him. So, with all the fights that he's had with animals, chipmunks, squirrels, rabbits, the skunk, we'll remember the skunk for a long time. A lot of times with, my dad would want to go somewhere and he'd bring the dog with him. And we had this red minivan that had a separator between the drivers and the passenger seat. And that's where the dog would stand. The dog would basically stand in between the driver and the passenger, and he'd want to see where we were going. And he didn't care how much space he took up. He just wanted to know where things were going. And I drove with him a couple times, and it's something you got used to, and you'd feel that heavy breath on you in the summer, and you'd have to crank up the air conditioning a little bit more so he'd stay cool. Later on, when I would drive to Chambersburg to visit Jen before we were married, I don't remember really how that came to be. It was the day my parents were out of town. It must have been, they must have been on a trip to New York or out with my sister or somewhere. I was the only one around with the dog, so I had to watch him. But that weekend, Jen was coming up to Hazleton to visit us, and I had to go pick her up. So I had to take the dog with me. And my dad told me, so this is how you travel long distances with Mchugh. So you stop off at Indiantown Gap or around there, and you bring a water dish with a squirt bottle full of water, and you go to a rest area, and he'll drink, he'll do his business, he'll walk around to some other trees, and then you get going the rest of the way. I took him to Chambersburg, and he got to meet Bob and Francie for a little while outside. They came out and petted him, and it was a quick visit. We got him back in the car and took him back to Chambersburg. And on the way back, we did the same thing. We stopped at a rest stop, and even Jen got to help out. Jen filled his water dish while I walked him, and I'm sure he was happy about that. He was always a good dog in the car. You know, a lot of dogs, they say they want to just bark in your ear about nothing when you're trying to drive. He really wasn't. He didn't get excited about driving. He just wanted to look out the front door and see where we were going. On occasion, he'd stick his head out the window like all dogs do to get a breeze. He enjoyed going everywhere with my dad. Now, like I said, he was a people dog. He'd rather drive in the car to hang out with my dad than sit at home alone, because if he's out in the car, he's in the middle of something. You know, he's a part of something. He's a part of the trip. And sitting at home, he was lonely. And you knew when my parents went on trips to New York City and they'd be gone for the day. I went on a couple trips with them that when they got home, it was a beautiful homecoming. You know, when the dog was sitting in the foyer at the foot of the stairs, just waiting. And when he heard the key go into the door, and when the door opened, he would spring up. He was always excited to see you. Always excited to see you.